Hey, I'm ZSH Plays. Welcome back to Jurassic Park. In today's episode, we're going to be building one of the most iconic scenes in the film, the Brachiosaurus Paddock, along with the Triceratops Paddock, and our first future attraction, Baryonyx. Let's go. The scene where Grant and the others see a Brachiosaurus for the first time is one of the greatest scenes in movie history, in my opinion. So I really want to get this right. We see it in the film as Hammond drives them from the arrival point down to the visitor center. Although they don't see it on the tour, I'm assuming it would have been one of the last stops, which is why they didn't get to it. Although the park's map does show a few alternative routes for the tour. It's not just one loop, so it's possible that there is a tour that you can take that starts here. We don't know. But what we're going to do is get the lake in the exact shape that we see it in the film, and then build the rise behind it where the visitors see the dinosaurs. We need to get this rise in the terrain exactly right so that when you're up here, you can see both the flatter piece of grass in between this rise and the lake, That's the view that you see in the film. So we're going to do a lot of terrain work around here and a lot of smoothing to make this look nice and natural. We've got the park tour running up here as well, which we'll finesse later on. I spotted just a tiny little tree just on the edge of the lake, so we'll use a couple of these saplings to make that. We'll remove all the water lilies from the lake, and there we go. That's the basic shape of this habitat and the lake. Now we need to put the fences in. This paddock is going to be enormous, as it should be. Not only has it got the huge brachiosaurs in it, it's got the Parasaurolophus as well. So we need to make sure they've got lots of space. Also, when you see the characters looking into this habitat at any point in the film, you never see any fences or barriers, so we know they're either very well hidden or more likely it's just enormous. So we're going to surround the whole area with fences, make sure they're all completely covered up with foliage, including the row of conifers that you can see at the back of the lake. And then finally for this little area, we're going to make it match what you see in the film by adding in some really, really tall palms poking up through the conifers, which is something else you can see in this scene. There's 3 of these. We'll get them to the same place and the same height as where they are in the film using these palms, which seem to be the closest match that we have in the game to the reference image I'm looking at. Thanks for all your helpful comments on the last episode, by the way. We'll be taking a look at one of the improvements that I've made off the back of those a bit later in the video. For now, we're going to get these palms into exactly the place that I'm seeing them in my reference image, and then we just need to make it so that they're not just floating in midair. So we'll just build our own trunks for them to make them much taller and attach them to the ground, just using a simple wooden pole here. We'll scale that to the right size and then just keep duplicating it until we get down to the ground. And that's this part of the habitat done, and we can introduce our first dinosaurs. Brachiosaurus first, and what a majestic animal they are. We're putting these guys in first because we're going to work on the rise in the terrain where Grant etc. first see it and get that looking exactly as it does in the movie. We'll get the park tour running through here in roughly the position I think that Hammond etc. drive up to, although they're not actually on the tour at that point. And then we'll add in trees that match the trees that we see in the film that the Brachiosaur is eating from. We'll scale up some of these eucalyptus trees and use those. We'll create another little subtle rise in the terrain here because the Brachiosaurus is kind of walking upwards, and then we'll smooth it out so it fits in nicely with the terrain around it. And then finally, we'll add in a few small plants to make it look nicer, and then we're going to add in some of the tall nuts that the Brachiosaurs eat in the game to make sure that they come up here and eat from the trees that we want them to be eating from. It's not just the Brachiosaurus in here as well. We've got the Parasaurolophus, so we're going to introduce some of those. What a name, Parasaurolophus. That's got to be one of the most satisfying names in the history of naming things, I think. I went with the Amazon River Basin skin and no pattern. This seemed to be the closest to what we see when they're off in the distance. We know that somewhere in or near this paddock is a big patch of forest that Grant and the kids see them in when they're sleeping in the tree. So we're going to fill this area with forest and some custom trees that are low enough that the Brachiosaur's heads will actually poke up above them when they're browsing. We'll put in the tree with all the big roots. We've scaled up a kapok tree as big as it goes to get those roots to be as big as they possibly can. We'll surround it with dirt and scavola bushes and then add the dinosaur eggs at the bottom. And then we'll take a look at what we've created. This is the rise just in front of the lake, and the combination of the eucalyptus trees and then the actual tall nuts trees means that the Brachiosaurs will come up here to feed. And this is the view down into the big lake. This is so close to the view in the film, minus a few humans. Really happy with this, especially when you hear the Brachiosaurs honking away. And here they are at night, browsing in the forest with the eggshells at the bottom of the tree. That's the Brachiosaurs, onto the Triceratops. If you're enjoying this, please remember to hit the like button, and if you're new to the channel, make sure you subscribe so you can see the rest of this series. We've made a clearing in the middle of this paddock, which we're going to surround with grass. This is the elephant grass, one of the most useful bits of foliage in the game. We're going to put this around the clearing, and then we'll make a little pattern of it, turn that into a group, and then we can just copy this all the way around this habitat, fill the whole thing with the long grass that we see our characters walk through on their way to the sick Triceratops, which is what we will be adding in a second. We'll join this on to the rest of the park, and then there's something very important that we need to build here. I was scratching my head for ages how we could build the giant pile that Ellie sinks her hands into, and after trying various pieces, I realized if we play around with the intensity, fall off, and slope of the terrain tool, we can actually create a pretty decent pile ourselves just with terrain and textures. Once we get the texture right on this and then smooth it out a bit, it is really close to the movie. I tried the root riddled dirt first, but that didn't quite give the effects that I wanted, although it looks good around it. So we'll place some of that in this area, and if we switch to the shrub brush, there we go, that is exactly what we're looking for. We're going to make a fairly sizable paddock for our Triceratops here. This is the next stop on the tour after the T-Rex. You can just see the T-Rex paddock at the bottom there. So we run it round here, right up to the edge of the map. I added some water in off camera, and that's the habitat done. Let's check it out. All the long grass is what Grant walks through after he jumps out of his car when the Triceratops catches his attention. And here it is. Unfortunately, you can't see them breathing in and out when they're tranquilized, which is a bit of a shame, but it still looks pretty good. I'm sure Malcolm would be impressed by this. That's the Triceratops. I mentioned that I'd made some improvements off the back of your comments, so let's check on our new Dilophosaurs. Thanks to Epicness Gamer and Dinos Are Magic for letting me know that it's the male Dilophosaurus that has the movie accurate model in the game. Now they look much better. Time for our first future attraction and our first original habitat build for one of the unseen dinosaurs on the Jurassic Park tour, the Baryonyx. This is one of my favourite dinosaurs. I think they're absolutely awesome, and it's going to be a lot of fun building a habitat for them. What we're going to do is embrace what I think is the Jurassic Park aesthetic for habitat design, which from the film seems to be, we've got a beautiful island here, let's stick up a couple of fences. So what I'm going to try and do is make it look like there's an amazing natural area in the park, and we're going to be using a modified version of this lake for that. And they've built the habitat here with viewing for the guests on a rocky outcrop overlooking a river backed with a beautiful waterfall. I want the tour vehicles to go right up to the edge of this area here. So we're going to get the terrain as close as we can to the track and then fill it in with rocks so it looks nice and natural. There are so many amazing rocks in this game. Placing rocks was always my favorite part of Jurassic World Evolution 2. Probably because it was one of the few things you can actually kind of do yourself. But in JWE3, it's a whole new ball game. These massive rocks and the sheer amount of different massive rocks that they've given us are so good for making things like this. It's an absolute breeze. We're going to surround the track with loads of different rocks, get a really, really natural look, and then we're going to get the water right up to these rocks so the guests are super close to the Baryonyx. This rock in particular is my favourite, I think. The end of it is really rough and weathered. It's a really, really interesting texture, and we're going to use this to fill in all the gaps between the rocks that we've already placed back to the beginning of this rocky outcrop. And then we just do a little bit of terrain painting to fill stuff in, and then we'll start getting the water as close as we can to the land. This is about as close as we can get with the normal water tool, but with JWE3, we have one of the best introductions into the franchise, which is the groundwater tool. Now we can have the water right up to the road. Love doing that. Let's move on to the waterfall. This is the first waterfall we've built in this game, come to think of it. The waterfall at the helipad was already there for us, so it's going to be fun exploring these tools. We'll make a big hill here, maybe not quite that big. We'll dig it down a bit, make it a more interesting shape, smooth off the edges, and then once we've got a shape we're happy with, we'll start putting the waterfall in. So we've already got water at the bottom, so we just need to add some water to the top, and waterfalls magically appear. Couldn't get any easier. Now we'll make it look more natural by covering up the terrain between the different parts of the fall with yet more lovely rocks. You could get away with this just by using the terrain paint to make the terrain that's left over a rock or a cliff texture, but I think it looks better if we use actual rocks to fill it all in. So we get one more in there, and then we'll start doing the sides of it and join those up with the terrain, get it right up to the edge of the map. You seem to be able to place things just past the edge of the map, which is nice. I'm doing that with this rock here. I wish the buildable area on this map was bigger, but nothing we can do about that without using mods, and we don't use any mods on this channel. And with the bottom level done, then we'll concentrate on this top level, because we're going to have another waterfall up here as well, so it all flows down from here, and then we'll fill the very back of it in with foliage, so you can't really see what's happening behind it. We'll use the terrain brush to easily add piles of rocks at the bottom of the waterfall to make it look more realistic, and then we'll delete the rocks that it places in front of the falls themselves, put in a bit more groundwater there. And then finally, we'll add the finishing touches to the waterfall with a few more rocks, and then we're going to get some ivy patches and place these in and amongst the rocks just to perfect the look of it. With the terrain all done and looking good, it's time to turn our attention to actually keeping a dinosaur in this lagoon. The terrain is so close to the water that if we use the default fences to create this habitat, as you can see, they look really, really janky, so we're going to make our own. This is going to be the secondary fence for the habitat, i.e. one that basically keeps the guests out of the habitat in case they want to jump out of the car or something. And then below the rocks, we're going to have the primary fence, which will actually keep the Baryonyx in there. So this one doesn't need to be super high. We're just going to manually place it around these tracks here, making sure they're not too close so that the cars can still get down there. And then we're going to put a concrete base in as well. I know there's a fence that already has a concrete base. In fact, we'll be using that as the primary fence, but doing it as two separate pieces like this enables us to get a really smooth look because we can rotate the fence and the concrete independently of each other. So we'll start running this around here. There we go. That's all of these fences in. We just need to get the concrete barriers in at the bottom as well. And then we'll just make sure that it is far enough away that the car's not going to crash into it. Okay, maybe it needs to be moved a little bit more. We've got one more issue as well. The terrain is still really rough here. I've discovered something really useful to use for that, which is the flattening foundations. It hadn't really occurred to me to use these outside of building a building, but if you're struggling with the terrain, you can just put these down. They will flatten just the little bit of terrain that you put it on, and you can even delete them afterwards, and the terrain will stay flattened. With that sorted, I want a huge tree to act as a centerpiece at the end of this land here. So we're going to scale up this kapok tree, get it right in the center, and then we will decorate around it with more foliage, making sure that we don't have anything too high that's going to distract from this. I ended up combining another tree in there as well. It looks pretty epic at the end of the road there. Let's do some more fence work now. We're going to put some actual kind of normal in-game fences in to mark out the habitat. Add a bit of land in as well for our Baryonyx, because this is almost entirely water at the moment. And then we'll join the fences onto the big rocks right up at the map boundary here. I want to make sure the Baryonyx has as much space as possible. So we'll get it joined on here, and then on the other side we'll join it here and do a little bit of decorating on the fence post as well. We'll add in a gate for the staff, and then we'll move on to our main building for the episode. With Baryonyx being a pretty serious predator, I thought it'd be really cool to have a watchtower looking out over the habitat so the staff can keep an eye on her. So what I've done is taken the watchtower from the raptor pen that I built back in early access, and we're going to improve and customize this into a standalone watchtower that will look over this habitat, and it'll also give us something in the background that the cars will drive past and add another dimension to this habitat. We've got searchlights on here, and I've set them up so they're looking at both sides of the habitat from this central point here. And now we're going to turn this into something that looks like a functioning building. So we'll get a path up to it, we'll surround it with some foliage, we'll get some ivy growing down it, and then we're going to start exploring all the new decals in Jurassic World Evolution 3, which is one of my favourite features. We'll get a damaged decal at the bottom, make sure the door's in front of it, get some rust on the door, get some generic kind of dirt on all four sides of the tower's walls. If you've watched the channel for a while, you know decals are one of my absolute favourite things in Frontiers games. I like to cover everything with them, and now we've got them in Jurassic World Evolution as well. I am a very happy man. We'll get one more on here, and then a sign to indicate that this is like an emergency assembly point if something happens to go wrong in the park. And then we'll surround it with just a basic fence. This isn't like a dinosaur-proof fence, just the kind of normal fence that you'd get around any kind of building like this. And then to create the illusion, if we're looking at it from above, that this is a functioning tower with stairs going all the way up it, I realised we could just drop a window on and use the new parallax feature to make it look like there's an interior to this building without actually having to build one. And now it's time for the last thing that we're going to do today, which is to add the primary fence into the habitat to make sure our Baryonyx aren't going anywhere. So we're going to use this big fence with the concrete base attached to it, run this around the base of all these rocks to make sure the Baryonyx couldn't get up the rocks and out of the habitat. We'll join it up with the fence that we've already put in, and that's the habitat complete. Time to get ourselves our first Baryonyx. I thought I'd show you a little overview of how Jurassic Park is progressing. Now that we've got 5 habitats in here, there's our sleepy Triceratops, here's the watchtower, and here is a Baryonyx. An amazing addition to the park, I think. I would love to have seen what Spielberg would have done with a Baryonyx habitat if they'd built the entire park. Hopefully you guys think I've done a good job with this habitat. It's the first habitat I've designed rather than just copying for a dinosaur for a very long time. I think it looks cool with the waterfall, the double row of fences and the rocks, and the view from the cars is really good as well. We'll see that in the park tour in the final episode of the series. Thank you so much for watching as always. I'll be back in 6 days' time with the next episode of Building the Ultimate Jurassic Park. I'll see you then. Bye.